And it's one thing to nurture a culture of experimentation in a company that already has that inertia, but it's a very different beast to start with a company that does not have that, and sort of figure out what are the boundary conditions that we need to put in place in order to make experimentation more possible. And one of the things that I've found is that a lot of it revolves around um, the how teams decide what to work on and how they collaborate between different functions.
Hey everybody, it's Richard here from Experimentation Podcast. Today I have Lukas Vermeer with us today. It's been a while since I've booked this conversation with you. For those who don't know,
Great to be here, finally.
Lukas was the experimentation director at Booking.com. So as you know, Booking.com is one of the the big experimentation role models, so to speak, for how to create a culture of experimentation, how to scale that. And he was there for how long were you there for? 10 years, 8 years. Yeah, so you basically started off. It looks like from LinkedIn, you started off as a data scientist and pretty much moved into various roles and product manager and to finally director. And it looks like now you're pretty much doing several things. You're obviously on the public speaking circuit, so you're invited to pretty much every conference known to man.
I wish.
Every CRO conference out there. Um,
No.
you're an advisor on AB Smartly, and you're currently acting as the director of experimentation at Vista.
Yeah.
So, welcome to the podcast, Lukas.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Look,
It's a nice summer in my career, or most of it anyway.
I'm really hyping that up, aren't I? um, yeah. Well, I usually like to have a quick chat about your education and just broadly going over that and maybe how you got into experimentation, because everyone's got different pathways and some people fall into it by accident, some people scratch their own itch, and maybe just give us a brief of your education and how you got into this crazy field.
Huh. It's not crazy. Who are you calling crazy? I'm not crazy. Are you crazy?
I think we're all
How did
mad
I get into this field?
scientists.
So how much education do you want? So my parents were both academics. I think that helps. So from a young age, but they were both linguists. So very different field. Um, I think I got lucky at a very young age that my father and his faculty, there was one colleague who was working on language in computers, or computers parsing language. I think this is relevant because now with these large language models, like the world has shifted, right? This completely different perspective on sort of how computers can do language. But at the time, it was still very much structural, still like computers trying to parse grammar in a very explicit way. And so that got me first interested in computers and in complex systems. Then in high school, I was very interested in biology and economics, or as other examples of complex systems. But then when it came to sort of I wanted to go to university. I wanted to study a field. I couldn't really find anything I liked until I ran into a specific, really an experiment at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands, which they called it technical artificial intelligence. And it was on the confluence between psychology and computer science. So I would have both psychology courses as well as computer science courses. And this was really early days not early days, but it was a different era for machine learning, right? So I learned a lot of the basic reinforcement learning algorithms. So like bandits were obviously part of the curriculum and all these things, but I learned them from a computer science background.
Yeah.
And then when I hit the job market, I went into consulting at first. I did some business intelligence work and mostly helped companies who were trying to use reinforcement learning for marketing automation or next best action models. It's like figuring out which customers want what, 1 watt. And I think that was really the first time that I ran into the concept of a control group, because
Mm.
one of the tools that I worked with had a control group built in, so you could see how well the machine learning model was functioning compared to some ground truth. So for most customers, that would either be a fixed calendar or a fixed offer or some sort of popularity ranking, but something that was a simpler model than the complex machine learning, or complex. At the time, it was complex, but now we would
Yep.
say like it was a basic bandit. Um, and so that, I think that was the first time I ran into a control group. It's also the first time that I ran into trouble with sort of explaining why that was useful to stakeholders.
Yeah.
Because I would have clients who'd ask me to turn off the control group, or who would ask me like, why are we showing customers an inferior version? And so like these were the first conversations I had around sort of like the importance of testing and sort of the value of this. And very much as a consultant at the time, right? So if a client asked to turn off the control group, I would try to convince them not to, but I didn't really have much say in the matter. Then I got lucky. Really, I mean, this is the first I've gotten lucky many times in my career, but this first time I got lucky, I think, was when I ran into a man who worked for Booking.com, and that was very much in the scale up phase at the time,
Yep.
and they were looking for someone to work on their recommendation system models, their bandits. And so I joined Booking in 2013, I think, as their first data scientist. And because I was the first data scientist, they were so much in scale up mode, the HR department actually didn't have a job description or a job role for data scientist yet, and so they made me a product manager, because that, in terms of like role description and salary bands, that seemed to be the closest to what I was looking for. And so
Yep.
I sort of like, my first interactions with product were like having the product manager title while doing a while doing a data scientist job. And so for the first, I think, 2 years at Booking, I sort of worked on their recommendation system models. And because this was very much in scale up mode, you can imagine like they were still operating very much as a startup. And so as a data scientist, I wasn't just building models in like a data org, like many companies function now, but I was also doing some of the engineering. I was also doing some of the product management. I was also
Yep.
doing some of the stakeholder management. And so in effect, like the product manager role wasn't all that strange. Like I was doing some of those tasks. And so it felt very natural for me to then go from that into a more formal product manager role. When we started hiring more people for the team, I became the product manager for recommendation systems, and later for ranking. So the order that you saw, if you went to Booking.com between say 2014 and 2016, the order in which you saw the hotels on Booking.com when you made a search, that was my responsibility at the time. Um,
Mm.
then I got increasingly interested in the A/B tests that Booking was running, and so I
Mm.
spent more and more time looking at the tests that other teams were running. And Jonas Alves at the time was responsible for that platform, but he decided to leave the company, and so I was asked to step forward and become the product manager for the experimentation platform. And that, you mentioned A/B Smartly earlier, so one of the
Yep.
reasons I'm working with A/B Smartly is that Jonas Alves later founded A/B Smartly, because
Oh.
he realized that as he started as a consultant, and he was asked time and time again to build the same product or the same platform that Booking.com had, to build it for other companies, and they realized that there might be a market for selling it. And so with A/B Smartly, what they've essentially done is rebuild Booking.com's A/B testing platform, but now anyone can buy it. So because I have affinity with that platform, I was responsible for the growth of that platform between 2016 and 2021. And Jonas and I sort of like, between us, have like 2 decades of experience in that. I think that was a sort of a natural fit to work with them. So that's a little bit of how I rolled into experimentation.
Hi, this is Romo Santiago from Experimentation. If you'd like to connect with hundreds of experimenters from around the world, consider joining our Slack channel. You can find the link in the description. Now back to the episode.
Thanks. Thanks. It's an interesting story, and look, I'm particularly keen in terms of learning how um you developed and scaled that culture of experimentation at booking.com. I think our audience is a lot of them would know how to set up at least beginners would know how to set up a basic A/B test using the current client side tools and sort of things like that. But before the podcast yesterday, we were talking about like how we can just use a client side tool, but not create a culture and just have a silo effect there, and where it's just usually done through marketing. So I won't steal your thunder. You discussed how you scaled it yesterday, so it'd be good to explain it to audiences and really like how to really truly embed experimentation, not just in one area of the company, but like throughout the whole company. So I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting topic that's been like the nucleus of my focus in the last few years. There's many things to talk about. I think one is that uh, I don't think we should take booking as a model, nor should we take my experience there as like as vouching for my sort of expertise in this area. Uh, Booking was already very much an experimentation culture when I joined. Like I didn't create that; it was already there, and I think it was very much driven by the founders and the people they hired and the way they organized their teams. It's not something that I created; it's something that I nurtured.
Yeah.
Um, what I did help was sort of taking at the time when I joined, that was very focused to the web side of things. So the website was running a lot of experiments, but there's many other aspects of Booking.com that were not. And so you can think of Booking sort of divided by different product areas. One of them being the sort of the website that's consumer facing, but there's also a website that is hotel facing that they use to sort of add rooms or change availability. And then there's obviously the customer care, the call center, and there's many other aspects of that business that were not really running experiments when I started. And so one of the things that I tried to do in the time was there was like on the one hand sort of like increase the quality of the experiments that were being run on the website, and at the same time sort of like scale out that approach to other parts of the organization, which mostly entailed on the figuring out technically how to sort of move into those areas, but because so for example, if you want to run experiments in a call center, you have to figure out how to integrate into an IVR, like a phone system.
Yeah.
You need to figure out how to do a coin flip based on a phone number, or you need to figure out how to do metrics based on that. So there's some technical challenges related to that, and then there's some organizational challenges related to how do we educate those people, how do we get them on board, like how do we help them understand that this is important. I think this is much easier when you have a large shared organization that is already running experiments. And so one of the ways that we scaled into partners, for example, was to take people, developers, designers, product managers who were already running experiments on the website, on the customer side of things, and say, hey, can you join one of the teams on the partner side and help them understand how to use experimentation as part of product development? And so like we could cross pollinate between these departments and sort of help them scale out. I think that made the job a lot easier. One of the reasons that I left Booking actually was I wanted to figure out, like, if I go to a different company that does not have this scale, like what other challenges do I run into? What is difficult about doing it there? And it's been actually very, very, very interesting learning experience, because I found, to your point, like there's a lot of people who know, including me, like know how to set up an experiment. And it's one thing to nurture a culture of experimentation in a company that already has that inertia, but it's a very different beast to start with a company that does not have that, and sort of figure out what are the boundary conditions that we need to put in place in order to make experimentation more possible. And one of the things that I found is that a lot of it revolves around um, the how teams decide what to work on,
Yeah.
and how they collaborate between different functions. And so when I joined Vista, uh, they were organized in such a way that there was a data organization, there was an engineering organization, there was a product organization, and a marketing organization that included design. And to me, this was very surprising, because for 8 years at Booking, I had worked in a model where there were cross-functional teams. And so if you think about ranking, my responsibility when as a product manager, I had a team that included data scientists, developers, and designers as part of one single team. And our job was related to making it easier for people to find a hotel that they could stay at.
Yeah.
And so we were not organized around craft, but we were organized around a customer objective. And I could argue to leadership and say, well, in order to accomplish this objective, here are the skills that I need. Right? I need a designer because I need to explain to people why this is the right hotel for them. I need a data scientist because I need to build machine learning models that help pick the right hotel, right? And so given the objective, there can be conversations about what skills are needed on the team. And these teams are long lived, and they're considered to be primary teams. So if you had approached my team members at the time and asked them, like, which team are you part of, they would say the ranking team, or they would say the search team. Now, when I joined Vista, I noticed that when you asked an engineer which team are you part of, they would name their engineering team. And you asked them, what do you own? They would name the service that they owned. And the same for the data analyst, and the same for product managers. Like, they weren't thinking in terms of customer problem focused teams. They were thinking in terms of craft teams. And so this makes experimentation much more difficult because there's many more communication hops, and there's much more room for misalignment between the different crafts, even though we're all working together to solve the same customer problem. And an experiment serves to figure out whether the customer problem is solved.
Yep.
But if we're not all aligned on what customer problem we're solving together, then the experiment doesn't really have value. And no one really sees a need to experiment in the first place. And so I started to think that we needed to change the organization of Vista towards a more cross-functional product team organization. And I will not in any way claim that I was the one who drove this change. Like, there were many people with me that had the same opinion. I have tried to push for this for the last 3 years, and I'm happy to report that the things are going really well and that we're slowly moving towards this product operating model. But I do think it's one of the boundary conditions that needs to be in place for experimentation to be really scalable. And so, to your earlier point, like, I think a lot of organizations, and especially the older, so like the first generation of experimentation platforms, they are very marketing centric and they're very marketing focused.
Yep.
And the pitch is essentially, put this script on your website and you will never have to talk to IT again to run an experiment. That's the pitch. And I think that is marvelous technology, but it sort of completely circumvents the core problem that we need to solve, which is that marketing and IT should not be separate in the first place. Right.
And they're usually kind of antagonistic. Well, they can't be antagonistic towards each other, because marketing will be like, okay, we've ran these experiments. Here's a few winning experiments that we want IT to productionize. And then for IT, it's like they're rolling their eyes and they're thinking, oh well, I'll just add that to my backlog of 100 other items on my to-do list.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes, and they're prioritizing in different ways, right? So one of the reasons that marketing struggles to put stuff on the IT backlog is IT just has different priorities, and that's why I think that these people should be together in one team and have the same set of objectives, ideally around the customer, because then the conversation changes. I mean, I'm gonna tell you an anecdote. We had a Booking.com reunion a few months ago, where like people who worked for Booking.com over the years sort of got together and sort of like chatted about their life after Booking. It's very interesting because it's very much almost like a cult following, if I might say so. I was talking to a group of engineers, and they were all surprised about sort of the engineering cultures that they found outside of Booking.com. And I said, oh yeah, I've noticed the same. When I say to people, like, at Booking, it was very normal that you go to an engineer and you say, I would like you to put, like, on these landing pages, I want you to change this thing.
Yeah.
It is very common for an engineer to then say, well, that page gets about 10,000 visitors a day, which translates into about 0.001% of our total revenue. So if I were to spend 2 days of work on this, like, that is already more expensive than 100% uplift on conversion that we would need to cover like the base cost. And there's no way we would get that, because the change that you're proposing, like, psychologically, I don't see why that would cause that much change in conversion. So I'm not going to prioritize it. And I'm sort of look around the circle of engineers, and they're all like, yes, that is exactly what is missing from the engineering cultures that we see in other organizations, where engineers they are not expected to, and so they do not talk in business terms. And
You
I
mean
don't think
like
this is a lack of
they're
skill.
just really just thinking, how do we technically set up this test? But they're not thinking
Correct. Yeah.
like a CRO would, where it's like, okay, we get 10,000 uniques per day or month or whatever, and these are the business implications if I set up this test. If it's high, then I'll just put it high up my back in my queue, in my roadmap. If it's pretty low, then I'll just push back against you and say no, this is not good, or put it lower down the roadmap. Um, yeah, like that's not something I've experienced with engineers, because usually they're just like, hey, I'll build it for you because you told me to.
Yes. And then I think that if that's the working model, then getting into an experimentation space is difficult, because you're just speaking different languages. And that's why I contrast this with sort of the newer generation of tools. AB Smartly is one of them. There's others, of course, and they're all founded by people who came from um, these organizations that are already running experimentation at scale. So Facebook, Airbnb, Booking.com, like
Yeah.
these are all companies that are running experimentation at scale. People coming from those companies, they design experimentation platforms in a completely different way, because they aren't thinking about it in terms of put this pixel on your website so you can avoid IT. They're thinking of it in terms of IT is at the table when you're designing this experiment. Like, they are involved in the design and the execution of the experiment. The vast majority of experiments that are run at Booking.com are run by engineers. Like, they're most of the tests are set up by an engineering person rather than by a product person. And so I think this is the biggest difference. Like, when we talk about the experimentation gap, this article that came out I think a year ago, like, this is a large part of the gap. Like, it's not just scale, it's scale that comes from a different way of working, and a different way of working that encourages especially engineering to think in a different way.
How, so maybe for our audiences who are listening to this, like, say they are in that sort of they're product manager or they're a CRO specialist or whatnot, and they're in that sort of early to mid stage of experimentation maturity, and um, they're still relying on just a client side tool, and they're thinking, okay, if I really want to embed a real culture of experimentation, I've got to go engineering first, and um, have a tool that's going to be server side, because it's going to be faster, and engineers, they care about speed and those sort of things. What kind of advice would you give to those people from your experience working at Vista, where they're in that sort of silo structured, to go into the cross pollination structure like you mentioned at Booking.com? I mean, do you have to restructure the whole damn organization, or how the hell do you do it?
I mean, that's a scary proposition. That's a scary proposition, isn't it? I think, please take my advice here with a huge grain of salt.
Yeah.
I think sort of, if you have to adjust your priors. This is a company that did not have a scaled or organizational culture uh, of experimentation at the time that I joined, but they did hire me, and so like that already tells you something about like the leadership buy-in that there was for experimentation
Yeah.
at the time, right? Because I think I talked to a lot of our other organizations, and just merely suggesting that you should hire a director of experimentation is already like a bridge too far for many organizations. In this case, we had Vista has a CEO that is very much bought into the idea that experimentation is an important part of product development, and the same for a CTO and CPO. So there's very strong leadership buy-in. There's also a long history of experimentation at Vista. It's just very decentralized. So I didn't know this when I joined, but Vista actually started running experiments before Booking.com did. So Booking started in 2005, February, I believe.
Yeah.
And Vista ran their first experiment somewhere in at the tail end of 2004. So
Wow.
they were just barely sooner, but somehow it never it did scale actually, but somehow it sort of like slumped again. And I was hired sort of as the slump was sort of panning out, and now we're going back up again. Um, and so I don't think Vista is like a good template for like how other organizations can do this, because I had a lot of wind in my sails. given that, like, when I joined, they did not have a product operating model, but me, like, coming from that, that is the only way that I know how to operate. Like, I don't really know how you would make things work if you don't have a cross-functional team that has all the skills that they need to sort of solve the problems that they're tasked to solve.
Mm.
So one of the first things I did was sort of explain to people, like, how I saw teams should function, even if that was not the reality of the organization at the time, sort of advocating for that model, and then applying it within my own team. Like, I had a very, very small team, of I believe 3 analysts or 2 analysts when I joined. And one of the first things I did was I went to an engineering leader and said, well, I want to try this new model where we take those 2 analysts and we take the 2 engineers that you have assigned to this topic, and we put them together and we tell them that they are one team, and we give them one name and we give them one identity, and together we give them objectives. And I was lucky to find an engineering leader that bought into that paradigm and said, yes, let's do it. And so together we set the objectives for this one team and started treating them as if they were one.
Mm.
And very quickly, then I hired Kevin Anderson as a product manager. I found sort of like an organizational loophole where I could hire a product manager as part of my organization, even though I wasn't in product, by calling him a data product manager. And that was the loophole. Like, and Kevin very much operates as a product manager. He's excellent. But he was called a data product manager because that allowed me to then hire him into the team. And so we could sort of treat them as a one, like, as an island of an empowered product team within a larger organization that was still grappling with a concept, and
Yeah.
use them as a role model, and go to leadership and say, like, hey, here's how this works. See the artifacts that they are creating. And again, Kevin is excellent for this because he's very much a documentation driven person. He will write things down, and he does so very publicly. And so all of the artifacts that this team was creating, we could also show them to leadership and say, hey, here's what the product team is doing, and here's the results they're having, and here's how they're tracking their KPIs. And so that becomes a role model, an example that you can use for the rest of the organization. At the same time, I have to say, like, I very much had the wind in my sails because we have a chief product officer who's very much bought into the same paradigm, who worked at Amazon before. We have a CTO that was very much bought into this, a CEO that also came from Amazon. And so we had all these people who understood this model. And then we got help from an outside consultancy, including Marty Kagan, who's known for what is called the product operating model, which I was not familiar with. But when I read all the material, it's like, oh yes, that's how Booking.com operated. So it feels like there's some sort of convergent evolution where, like, a lot of these companies are finding out that if you put people of different crafts together and you give them a customer problem to solve, and you give them flexibility on how to sort of explore solutions, that is a very effective model. And Marty has done some great work in sort of documenting how the differences between the different companies and sort of commonalities between different companies approaching this. I was lucky to be hired into a company that did this. Now I'm lucky to be in a company that is not slowly, this is rapidly adjusting to the style of working. And so, like, 3 years ago, we were completely siloed. Now, like, we are completely product operating model. There's no more separation between engineering, product, and design. Like, they're all one now. So.
In terms of cultural change, um, would you say that there are a lot of growing pangs and going
Oh, of
from
course.
the silo model to the sort of cross siloed model? Like, I mean,
Oh, it's yeah.
do you get people leaving for these reasons? You get people that are like, oh, this company's changing. I mean, is it common to
Yes,
sort of?
so 2 things. There are definitely growing pains. So it's not easy. I'm not
Mm,
at all suggesting, and it does take time. Like, this is a process that's going to take years.
yeah,
It does, and I think it's difficult for 2 reasons. Like, people have to find a new way of working. They have to find new rhythms, and so we have a separate part of the organization that is specifically tasked with figuring out those organizational rhythms, and they also operate as product teams. And so they set their own objectives. They measure their outcomes in terms of how teams are operating. And this is not treated as a one-off program. This is an ongoing improvement thing within the organization. Like, how do we work? That's one. I think the others, like you said, like, are people leaving? Um, I don't think I don't think we see like people leaving in droves. Like every company has attrition, right? And
Yeah,
Vista
of
is
course.
no different. I do see like people have to stretch themselves because this model does ask different things. So to go back to the earlier example about engineers, right? Booking called these T shapes. You want people who are not just very good in one craft. You want people who are good in one craft, but then know a little bit or know enough about each other craft to have conversations with their peers, right? An engineer should know enough about the business and about the metrics of the product they're responsible for to
Yeah.
have conversations with a designer and a product manager about the product they're working on. And the designer should know enough about the engineering problems to be able to talk to the engineer about solutions to designs that they have come up with, right? And so this requires people to think a little bit outside of their craft. And there are people who want this, and there are people who don't want this. And I think that is a shift we're slowly seeing, and I think it's one of the reasons that you see that not only are there growing pains, there's also I think it was Kurtz who was this famous quote like the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Um,
I've heard of that. Yeah.
right? We have teams that are operating really well in this product operating model, and we have teams that are really struggling in this product operating model. And so we're trying to find ways to, again, cross pollinate like we did at Booking. Like, how do we take people who are very effective at this, like put them in teams that are struggling, and it's like how do we like a rising tide floats all boats? And that is just a process that we need to go through. I'm in no way suggesting that this is easy.
And you're still on your
And this
journey
again,
too.
even if you have leadership buy-in, it is still not easy.
You've mentioned this a few times that you had leaders like the C-suite execs having huge buy-in, and I think it sounds like that's a common, it's a huge factor for driving this, don't you think? Like if it's not coming from the top, if it's such a sort of bolted on the side like marketing, it's always going to be in that sort of silo sort of paradigm where it's like marketing versus technology or whatever. But if it's coming from the top down and it's like really embedded from the execs and it's flowing throughout the whole organization, not saying it's easy, but that sounds like that's a key element that you need. Would you agree? Like,
I would
like if you don't
say
have it, do you
yes,
think you have it
yes, and that's
yeah,
not sufficient.
it's not sufficient.
Because I would say yes, leadership needs to be buy-in, and leadership needs to understand that it has implications for how they organize their business
Yeah.
and how they operate themselves.
Mm.
This is the part that is not easy.
Mm.
You might have a leader that says, "Yes, I want you to run experiments. Marketing, go run experiments." But we'll keep the engineering organization aside. We're not touching it. Then they're not bought in enough.
Yeah.
That's not
Then you'll
sufficient.
kind of end up being siloed. Um. Yeah. So look, it's unfortunately we can't go on for too long, but any closing thoughts for our audiences?
And I hope what I share helps.
Oh yeah,
I
definitely.
hope I've also given you enough caveats to say like this is my experience at two companies. So like, and I again, I've been very lucky. I've had the wind in my sails for a long time. If you struggle with this, I'd be happy to chat. Like to hear the things you're struggling with. Maybe I can help. So please do reach out. Let's
Yeah.
talk.
How can
we
people?
are
How can
all
people?
learning, right? This like
Yeah.
we are experimentation people. Let's experiment with how we do the organization around experimentation.
How can people contact you, Lucas?
Sure. So just go to my website, my name.nl, NL for Netherlands. And then there's a link at the top that allows you to book some time in my calendar or send me an email, whatever you want. That's the quickest way.
Awesome. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Bye.
See ya.
Hi, this is Romo Santiago from Experimentation. If you'd like to connect with hundreds of experimenters from around the world, consider joining our Slack channel. You can find the link in the description. Now back to the episode.